Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, June the 11th, Spending Review Day. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to a special edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes, which means looking forward to the moment we find out where, after weeks of haggling between government ministers, the government is going to parcel out cash for the bulk of this parliament.
Chancellor Reeves will stand up in the Commons a little after 12:30 with a promise to invest in Britain's renewal, a phrase you are going to hear a number of times today, and prioritise security, health and economic growth as she doles out the budgets for the next 3 years from 2026 onwards. And the message they want you to hear is that they're spending and spending generously.
Yeah, not quite so much the prudence that we heard during the election campaign, is it? They're going to say that they can do all of this because they have, quote unquote, fixed the foundations and introduced stability. And it's just on this big picture argument that I want to stop and pause at the start of this podcast. Fix the foundations is the language that they're using. And it's a big claim, and I think we should reflect it's a big claim. They're not quite saying that we're in the economic sunny uplands, but suddenly this government is starting to imply that the country is on the up and able to benefit from increased growth. And I just think we should sort of just pass that for a moment.
And given that the government, Sam, is going to spend all day on the media making this claim, which they say shows the economy is turning a corner to justify that big winter fuel allowance U-turn and the general upbeat language that they want to use here, it is going to be central to the argument. And there are plenty of people in business who are experts on the economy and on predictions, etc., who say, is this a bit ahead of the facts or a bit too optimistic? So I think the fundamental question about this spending review is, will they get away with this framing of it? Things are on the up. It is time to invest. Yes, they've had to turn some awkward corners, but this is a different kind of spending review to the one that they would have done last year. Will that wash?
Right. So the claim that things are economically improving is based on three assertions by government that we've seen in the public domain. We can take each one in turn. So the first one, and Keir Starmer was telling my colleague Beth Rigby this yesterday, is he is pointing to the first quarter GDP figures and saying, look, they're much higher than anyone predicted. Okay, so we've done the research. That is true. The UK grew by 0.7% in the first quarter of this year. And yes, it's higher than, for instance, the Bank of England. Now, they forecast 0.6%. So it's not much higher than the Bank of England forecast, or the average of forecasters that put it at 0.4%. So, yeah, it's a little bit higher. But there are further caveats. Economists say that this wasn't a normal quarter. The House of Commons Library points out that effectively that 0.7% isn't likely to be sustained. So perhaps don't put too much weight, too much pressure on that one quarterly figure, not least because of the sharp increase in inflation and economic uncertainty around global trade tariffs. So the 0.7% being higher than expected, yeah, that's factually true, but is that a big picture thing that you can rely a lot of economic heavy lifting on? Not so sure.
The second claim is that this set of figures means that the economy is growing at the fastest rate of any country in the G7. Well, yeah, I mean, the US and Japan have had negative growth of 0.1%, 0.2% respectively in the first quarter. Germany is second fastest behind the UK, or 0.4%. Is very much the aim of the new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who never talks about anything else than getting that figure to rise. And France has also had a laggardly 0.1%. The US, particularly torrid time because of tariffs. Donald Trump would say, well, he was factoring that in. It was going to be a bumpy period. So the question is really, is it wise to make a case for sustained improvement when there is such flux around these numbers? And frankly, also, given that they're often within the margin of error, does it really make any sense if you're trying to say we are on the up? It's just we're just doing a little bit better on some statistic than another benighted country is having a tough time.
The final reason that you can hear a lot of government ministers claim things have got a lot better is that we have had 4 Bank of England interest rate cuts in a row. Again, Keir Starmer asserted this to Beth Rigby yesterday. Even that one raises slight eyebrow as a big picture claim, because the Bank of England governor, Andrew Bailey, said publicly that last year's budget actually would slow, in all likelihood, the path of interest rate cuts because the budget was itself inflationary. And we've got a problem, and I think this is the problem that the front page of the Mail today reflects, which is that wages are running a lot higher than inflation. And that means that when the Monetary Policy Committee next week meets to decide what it's going to do about interest rates, there's every chance that they don't reduce interest rates for a fifth month in a row. This is resting a big claim on something that is sort of only on the balance of probability is going to continue to be true and noticeable.
There's a bigger point here that you remind me of there, Sam. It's a bit like that point about the wind chill factor. If you're in a place where the temperature is supposed to be fine and then you go outside and this is really terrible. I'm really feeling it. Just telling people the economy is improving when growth overall is expected to be 1% this year, just over 1% in the following year. And even that is a little shaky, and there's so much more uncertainty and potential negative onslaught from tariffs, is bold, not just because you can make an economist's argument if you want, and other economists will shout back about it, but does it feel to people like the economy really is getting better, or will they just start to distrust these figures?
Yeah. I mean, I've got some new YouGov polling from over the weekend. 14% of the people think the economy has got better over the last year, which is basically since Labour got in. 50% think it's got worse. So that's a massive discrepancy. 10% of people feel personally better off, 51% worse off. Right, you try telling them anyway. It's not going to happen. Anyway, shall we move on to the big picture of the spending review, the kind of overall thing when we've digested the graphs? I think we've got by now a pretty good sense of who's going to come out as the winners, certainly, in this spending review, and who's going to come out with a slightly tighter settlement. Do you want to start with your understanding of the big picture, Anne?
Defence is the big winner here. I was just talking to a colleague of John Healy's in Cabinet saying, John Healy's grin is going to be the biggest going out of today and the days and weeks and months that follow the spending review. So I think defence is the big winner. There's even like a bit of a joke, even among people who are well disposed towards them. Well, we can get what we wanted because it's all going to defence. Well, let's see. But health clearly also a big winner, very solid. I don't think there's much discombobulation there around West Streeting. He certainly has plans and things that he wants to do with it, and that will be interesting as we go into the summer. But there's not a sense of cheese pairing about that. Sam, I'm really interested in the nuts and bolts of things like transport and infrastructure, because you do have to spend a lot there to get much impact. And it also tends to be, by its nature, very geographically determined in a way that, say, defence people will kind of accept that. Health, they might say, well, my NHS is not as good as somewhere else. But it's a national picture. Transport gets local pretty quickly.
So that's right. The big picture, as you say, defence and health get the sort of lion's share of the investment in this world where Rachel Reeves has the ability, on average, to raise budgets by 1% every year from 2026 to 2029. So overall, the picture is very, very tight. So given that those two departments do well, other departments struggle. Now, one department that has managed, we think, to squeak through and over the line and get a good settlement, depending how they account for it, is transport. There is an infrastructure budget there to be thrown at the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. Rachel Reeves was trying to get money out the door and give it to the Transport Secretary because she thinks that transport is a big thing that can be dangled in front of voters ahead of the next election. So I would expect transport to do well. A lot of that money, some of that money has gone direct to the Metro mayors. That happened last week. About £15 billion of capital spending went to the Metro mayors last week. But on top of that, I think there is funding for projects direct to the Department for Transport. So their settlement should look quite healthy. There is some money for the Department for Communities and Local Government and Housing, Angela Rayner's department. We know overnight that they've said that they're going to double the amount that's going to be spent on affordable housing. But then when you look down the rest of the cabinet league table, I think it is going to be tricky. You've got a number of people who I think we're going to focus on in the morning. You've got Top of the list, I suspect, the Home Office. They, of course, settled last. They are happy, I believe, with what they've got for borders, but policing remains a problem. I think this is going to be the spending review where the announcement tomorrow isn't really the end of the piece. I've got one little detail for you, Anne, about the spending review when it comes to the Home Office. Clearly, there is a sense that even though there is a settlement for the Home Office and for policing, that's not the last word in the matter. There's a sense that the negotiation isn't the final word when it comes to the Home Office police and budget. Now, I understand that actually what's going to happen next is that there's going to be a forward-looking review into police funding that's going to kickstart after the spending review. And that is going to look at how the police forces get their money and how it's allocated. And there's also going to be a police reform white paper raising the possibility that some of the forces could be merged potentially to save budget. But whatever happens, both of those things are going to report before the budget in the autumn. So we're going to see whether or not exactly what was agreed in the days leading up to today's spending review hold. That's one area, I think, and I've picked up a couple of areas where I think that negotiations have paused and finished, but only for now, and will resume. There will be fighting in this area and certainly tough discussions in this area in the weeks and months to come.
I think this is a row that is not over yet. I mean, I think you can say if everyone's kind of happy that they got the business through before the spending review, well, you really have to do that unless you're going to go out there into a kind of protest position. That would not be what someone with the experience of Yvette Cooper in spending reviews was going to do as Home Secretary. But Yvette Cooper has on her plate border security, she has police, she has immigration, she has safer streets, she really obviously has policing and everything that flows from it. And I think my understanding is that there is a better area of agreement, shall we say, about security in the big picture. One of the questions that I think was being put there is like, well, yes, fine, thank you very much for the money on that and the backing on that, but can you please remember the other bits of the role? As Home Secretary, Antonia Romeo came in as permanent secretary to the Home Office from Justice not long ago. She's very experienced in this as well, and in helping and guiding and supporting Yvette Cooper in cabinet on this. I don't feel this is over yet. And I think the way that they got through it was by saying everyone has to get behind defence and security at the moment. So please take your settlement on that. There are certainly other areas, as you say. I think she's got a very good way of playing the ball forward, Yvette Cooper, because it's really not her first time around a department or around a spending review. I'm not going down the route of those newspapers saying she's on resignation watch. I don't believe that to be true. I think she's more on kind of what's she going to do next watch, because that one is, I don't think is over.
No, I think that's right. She did do well, I think, when it comes to borders. I think that there's been a almost £700 million cash boost to help with that. So I think there is a sort of push me, pull you settlement, I think, when it comes to the Home Office. One other big department that I think we're going to be focusing on is the Education Department. Now, as we said on Monday, the schools budget will go up, but not by as much as it was presented at the weekend. It's going to go up by 0.4% in real terms between 2026 and 2029. So an additional 150 million each year. But of course, education is a lot bigger than that. And I think overall, the education department budget is a bit challenged. My understanding is that whilst basically everyone thinks that they can live within their means for 2026 and 2027, the reality of the education budget is that there's a bit of an acceptance on several sides that the settlement that they've got simply will not wash by the time they get to 2028, just ahead of the next election. And I think that whilst this is meant to be a spending review for 3 years, there's a feeling there, and I suspect a feeling elsewhere as well, that they're going to need to revisit that budget in the third year, which means that this isn't quite the kind of stability guarantee that it's going to be presented as later today.
Who do you think the losers are then, Sam?
Well, I think there are parts of the education budget. One thing I heard from a Secretary of State is that something that has not fared well across the whole of Whitehall are the skills budgets. Somebody said to me, for whatever reason, the Treasury has just not really accepted arguments around skills as something that it's going to prioritise. So I think that's critical. I think you are going to see other below inflation results. Take one example, the business department. I'd expect the business department to get, I know the business department has got what's called a flat cash settlement. In other words, the number of pounds and pence in that department is fixed. But that, of course, means that it has to basically find the cost of inflation from within its own budget. In other words, that's a real term squeeze when it comes to the business department. So that's things like business investment. That's the growth department. Now, I don't think they're desperately unhappy in the business department, but that still will make things harder. I think that we will look closely at the environment department as well. There will be questions there about just how much it's been able to extract from Rachel Reeves. Steve Reed was a cabinet minister that settled early. I don't think it's done terribly, but it's the kind of place that is traditionally unloved amongst government departments.
And also possibly cleverly politically splitting off Ed Miliband there, who had his big day in the sun. I just happened to be in the back of a lot of cabs today, and I was listening to Ed Miliband on nuclear most of the day, making that case for nuclear, but also through that prism of energy security, climate change, etc. That sort of maybe cauterized some of the complaints that we might have been hearing about environment, because it's this forward-looking idea, which I think is also something we're going to hear ad nauseum today, that this is about investing for the future. It's not just about a cheese pairing spending review, which we all kind of know it is, also because you had that big change on winter fuel allowance. So, clearly money has to come from somewhere else. But if you can read the political strategy of it, let's see how this lands. It's all different, isn't it? Until someone gets up and says it. I thought it was really interesting putting the big nuclear announcement one day before. Wrong-footed a lot of people who thought they were going to be talking about something else entirely, but not us. But that also means that you've got that signal to the country that you're investing for the future, you're optimistic about the future, and you're making changes.
That's right. There'll be the odd consumer-friendly stuff like the £3 bus fare extended to 2027. But there's one other big picture political point that the government were going to make, but I wonder whether they shy away from later today, Anne. When the spending review was started, they made massive play of the idea that it's something called a zero-based review. Now, that jargon translates as, we promise to go through every single line of government spending and make sure that it's the money's being spent sensibly, and only keep it and only continue to fund programs if they match our priorities and they do so in a value for money method, right? And that was meant to be the process in the run up to this spending review. And I am told that has happened. However, what that should mean in practice is that we should be able to say to any cabinet minister we want to, can you vouch that you have now gone through the books and promised that every single pound that your department is spending is wise, is sensible, is in line with your priorities? And the thing is that, funnily enough, after going through all of these priorities, I bet, Anne, that the budgets look actually, in the big picture, pretty similar to what they did before. So they're telling us it's something called a zero-based budget review, and they are meant now to be able to swear by every pound of government spending. I doubt they really can, because that's not how these things work in practice.
Not at all. But, another day, another dollar, another pound here or there. Getting through this spending review. How long have we been talking about it on the podcast? Right? At least 2 weeks in detail and a run-up before. You've had your AI on it. There's literally nothing. And we are not alone in this. Focus in Westminster and Whitehall on this spending review. I think when you go around the parish a bit, people are going to be just very happy if it passes off. You can make that claim. People can argue about how it really works out in terms of how whether that was a credible claim. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a bit like what was before, with a bit of a new pattern on it. The government wants to get on with other business, and it's also doesn't want to get too bogged down. And remember, we were supposed to have not so many big fiscal events, and yet here we are.
Well, we'll see how it all pans out through the day. Do follow it on Politico and on Sky. We will be back to assess how it went tomorrow morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we will see you then.
See you then.